Welcome to the Fleet Success Show, a podcast dedicated to talking about the fundamentals, standards, and best practices that empower today's fleets to achieve fleet success. Let's get into the show.
All right, welcome back for another episode of the Fleet Success Show. Glad to have you guys with us, listening as always. You guys are so awesome. Joining me today, my co-host, Jeff Jenkins.
Happy New Year.
Right?
Ringing in the 2022.
Finally turned the page on 2021.
2021, they can both go to hell, right? Start fresh with 22.
Right? I totally hoped that this was going to be the roaring 20s. Another just awesome decade.
Speakeasies and
so far, it's just not living up to it.
It's not. Kind of prohibition with making people, follow all these regulations, but...
people are going to look back on today from years from now, just like they look back on prohibition and all that.
Most likely.
All the things that we had to do and go through.
Yeah.
Quarantine babies and
be like, what the hell were you guys thinking?
Yeah. Maybe.
No, they will. Trust me. They will.
One way or another.
Yeah. At some point. Listen, and this is off topic, but I totally have to say this.
Do you?
I kind of do. This person did a tweet where they had a mask. It was an N95 mask, N94, N95, but they used surgical tape to secure it around their face just to make sure that extra little bit didn't get through because they were going on an airplane and they did not want to get infected. You're hardcore when you're using surgical tape to seal it in.
Yep. I could tell you is that having a beard and a mask like that just isn't fun. And so I could imagine putting surgical tape on the beard would just make it even less fun.
Remember when someone would throw duct tape on your legs with the hair and then you have to rip it off?
No, I didn't have friends like that. I think that was just you.
Boy, we did some crazy stuff.
I got see now why you shave your legs though.
That's exactly why I shave my legs now because I still have those friends apparently.
So today, we don't have Steve with us, so there's no adult supervision in the room. Today, we're talking all about, this is the new year, turn of the calendar. What are you going to do different this year than you did last year? One of the things that we're really big on here is this idea of being intentional and really thinking about what's most important. What do you need to focus on over the next coming months to move your fleet forward, to move your organization to a better place? And a lot of people don't take the time at the beginning of the year, and really you should be doing this at the end of the year. We try to do it about a month before the end of the year. But you don't take the time to really think about where you want to go. And if you don't think about where you want to go, I think there's a Yogi Berra quote about that if you don't know where you're going, your odds are is you're going to get there. You're just going to end up wherever you end up.
So we're talking about vision right now and kind of setting that vision. But most organizations, all they do is budget planning. They don't take it to that next level. It's just, what are our finances going to be? What's our budget? What are our financial goals? But it doesn't have anything to do with more long-term strategic or culturally.
Right. And there is an element, if somebody were to ever ask me, well, what's our strategy? I can almost tell you what your strategy is by looking at your P&L and looking at your income sheet, because it'll tell you as you look at the income statement where you're prioritizing your spend. And that is just kind of it's what we call, what's the word for it? It's just kind of, it happens, right? It's like your organic strategy.
Right.
But it's not intentional. It's like an accidental strategy, which is something we talk about all the time with intentional culture versus accidental culture. Vision setting is the exact same way. If you're not purposeful and you don't tell your money where you want it to go, then it will find its own way out the door.
Well, and a lot of people just do the same thing year after year.
Right.
It doesn't ever deviate. So, we spent $250,000 this year on 10 new vehicles. So next year we're going to do the same thing.
Right. And then especially if you're not doing a zero-based budget,
yes,
then you definitely just kind of let the status quo, and then, we call it bureaucratic inertia, where it just kind of carries through, and the weight of the organization is just maintain the status quo, whatever it takes. So one of the things that we always like to do is take some time, and we do this every quarter. Actually, we're on a trimester basis, but a lot of people do this quarterly. But then especially at the end of the year, we really make sure we nail that meeting. And about a month before the end of the year, we'll sit down and we start thinking about, okay, how did we do? Where are we going? What's next? And we start looking at, so I'll break down kind of what our annual looks like. The first exercise we do is called lessons learned. It's, what did we learn this last year that we want to take forward in next year? And we usually phrase that in some form of like an if then. So, if we put a job ad out, it's going to take us 2 or 3 months to hire, right? If we, talk about this, then this is what happens. And so you usually try to do this kind of if then. What are some lessons, both good and bad, that you want to make sure you take forward into the next year? I always really like looking at, the next thing I look at is accomplishments. I think a lot of times, especially for us, as you're looking at always improving, always driving, you're hungry, you're constantly trying to get better. A lot of times we forget to look back and say, hey, how far have we come? Because you're always just thinking, we're not there yet, we're not there yet. And if you've ever gone climbing up a mountain or hiking, you know what it can be like as you're looking at the trail and just watching your feet go one after the other, to stop and take a moment, look back down the trail, and all of a sudden you realize, wow, we're 1,500 feet up. And to have that perspective suddenly of we actually have made a lot of progress in the things we have done. And celebrate that. You want to take the time to remember what you won and then celebrate the wins.
Yeah, the accomplishments exercise is a little exciting, but it always starts off slow.
Yep.
Because you're trying to think back for a whole year of, hey, what did we do well? What did we get done? And you don't always remember those things because you are constantly looking to move forward. But once we got rolling, our accomplishments list filled up a page and a half.
Yeah,
it was great to see everything that we'd done, and half those things on there I personally had forgotten about.
Yeah, and that's what I love about it is when you do get multiple people inputting, all of a sudden there are things that maybe they weren't as important to you or you forgot about them because you're so heads down on this next problem. And so I love the perspective that the team brings into it. Oh yeah, I totally forgot that we launched that thing. And that was this year. That was this year. That felt like it was 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah. So I always like doing that. It just kind of really helps set the tone for the meeting too, especially if you're doing it early in the meeting, because it just helps you be positive and it gives you confidence that, we can do hard things. We can accomplish the things we want to. So I like going over accomplishments. The next thing we like doing is it's a spin off of a SWOT analysis. And so SWOT, normally you're going to look at things that you're strong at, things that you're good at. That's your strengths. The next thing is weaknesses, things you're not very good at, and they could be harmful to the organization. And both of those are going to be internally focused. So things that you as an organization are strong or weak at. And then SWOT normally will look at your opportunities and threats, which are external facing, things that are happening outside of your control, outside of your four walls, but they're going to influence what happens in your area. So if you're a trucking company, opportunities would be there's a huge demand for moving merchandise now because of the big push to go remote. But there's a huge threat because of things like rising fuel costs or delays at the ports or driver shortages and so those are going to be external things that you don't really have a lot of say in that are affecting the whole industry.
But you still need to be aware of.
You have to be aware of them because suddenly there will be a new threat that pops up and it'll kind of come out of nowhere. And it might seem small at first, but then it's going to get bigger and suddenly you have to deal with it. And you don't want to get blindsided as an organization. And so the idea of this is that you're trying to surface some of those things that could come out and, we call it taking your lunch money or moving your cheese, is that they can come out and really change what's happening in the industry. And a good organization, as they're looking at opportunities and threats, and they look at their internal strengths and weaknesses, they can find ways to mitigate threats, or they can capitalize on opportunities, and maybe they need to move into a new market, or maybe they need to change how they're messaging. And so that you're constantly looking at how is the landscape shifting underneath our feet, and where do we need to put our weight to make sure that we stay stable and that we can take advantage of that. And if you're in a competitive space, I know we've got some government listeners, so that might not apply so much to you, but if you're in a competitive space where you're trying to differentiate yourself, that can be a big deal, to move into a new market or be the first person there. And SWOT kind of gives you the opportunity to see those things and talk about those things before they become a really big thing that you have to deal with.
Yeah, which is why it's great to do it every time you do a planning, whether it's quarterly or like you said, we do trimester, because those are things that you always have to be aware of. Mm-hmm. Some of them you have to be very quick at reacting. So for example, rising fuel prices. If you're in the trucking world, your fuel surcharge, you've got to adjust that constantly based on those rising costs.
Yep.
If you decided not to do that and you waited until the next quarter, trimester, whatever the planning is, you're going to lose a ton of money.
Yep.
Because of how quickly it's gone up.
Well, and even just thinking the reason why you have to do it so frequently too. Think about COVID. January, if we did our planning meeting in December 2019, and by April, which was our next quarterly deal, like our SWOT was totally different than it was just 4 months prior.
Yeah.
And if we had waited a full year to do another SWOT analysis, we'd be slow. We'd be moving slowly. We would be pivoting slowly. And so there would be things that we wouldn't necessarily be doing intentionally. We'd be reacting rather than being proactive. And that's really the whole point of this, is to be proactive with your year, proactive with your time, and treating your time like you would your budget. And so giving it the same focus and the same energy that most people do with their budgeting and process around that, is being just as intentional with what do we want to work on? Where do we want to go? We like including our stakeholders in all these, which means we look at our shareholders, we look at our customers, we look at our employees. We actually involve our employees in this whole process. Everybody in the company weighs in and helps type up the accomplishments and the lessons learned and the SWOT and the trends. That's the last thing we do, is trends. It's just overall trends that we're seeing in the industry or just in general.
I actually think, and this is the first time I've ever included everybody when you're doing the SWOT, and it's really enjoyable because you get a different perspective than you would have if it was just the executive team meeting.
100%.
There are wins or accomplishments that we have that we may not think is a huge deal, but our people think it's a huge deal.
Yeah.
Or there's some things that we think that, that's a slight weakness, but they think they're bigger weaknesses than we give consideration. So by involving everybody, especially frontline people, you really get to the meat and potatoes of, hey, this is what we need to work on, or this is what we do great. Let's keep improving on it.
Yeah. Well, and if there's holes that you're running into, that from your perspective, you're not dealing with the day-to-day, the ins and outs. And so you don't realize how big of a problem this really is, because by the time it gets up to you, it's like layers of insulation.
Yeah.
And so, by the time that noise gets to you, you think it's just a little tiny noise, but down here it's deafening. And so I love being able to kind of surface those things up and have them, they've got a direct line to the CEO, and we're listening and we're hearing all this, and there's no filter. Everything goes and it all gets put onto the paper.
Yeah. The unique question that we ask is, if you were CEO right now, what's the one thing you would do? And I like that. Now, a lot of people don't treat it very seriously, right? You get the things like, more covered parking. We want free lunch every day. Yeah. I mean, you get those people that'll say those things, but we actually get some fairly good ideas about what people think we should immediately start to improve upon.
Yeah, or like where our biggest challenge is.
Yeah.
And again, sometimes we just have no idea. I didn't realize this was as big a deal as this is. And we would have just gone on letting it be, and to finally realize, oh, wow, no, this really makes a difference to these people. Let's go ahead and make a change here. And that question gets them thinking more strategically. If you were in charge for a day and nobody else, was above you, you could make the decision, like, what's the first thing you'd go out and do? And it forces them to prioritize. And that's really all strategy is just a prioritization exercise. And I love that gets them thinking that way and thinking about, okay, well, what is the biggest threat? What is the biggest weakness? How do we go out? What do we need to do next? And we get some really good feedback there. Even the free lunch is like, okay, so what could we do instead of that? Or how could we address that? Other times it tells you, we're doing good in that person's eyes. So it's fun to include.
If all they could improve upon is getting free lunch every day, you're not doing too bad.
Yeah. So from all of that, then the next thing we usually go through and do, after we've gone through the SWOT Plus exercise, we've done the accomplishments, lessons learned, as we kind of start breaking down and we talk like the strategic issues. And strategic issues are all about priority problems. It's priority and a constraint. We wish we could do everything. And you guys, you're dealing with technician shortages, you're dealing with driver shortages, you have vehicle shortages now. Everything becomes about prioritizing your limited resources. How are you going to spend money? How are you going to spend time? And so usually we phrase these as how do we X given Y? So how do we maintain vehicle uptime given the lack of available replacements for vehicles? How do we maintain a good PM program given the lack of skilled resources in our technician pool? How do we make sure that we can service all of our bus driving routes, given that we don't have any bus drivers? And so you start pairing these, strategic issues, and what ends up happening, and we actually did this really well this last time, and it takes some practice. I will tell you that we've been doing this for now 3 years. I've gone through this with a variety of different team structures, and this last year was the year I finally felt like, wow, we really did a good job.
This last one was awesome.
And a lot of that reason is because we actually brought in a coach to help us facilitate it, who knew what they were doing. That's going to be a different podcast episode. But you go through and you basically go through around the room. Everybody writes down their top 3 strategic issues. What are the 3 biggest things that you think are like the biggest problems that your company or your organization is facing right now? And as you go through and somebody says, well, how do we grow revenue, or how do we grow our company? Or let's, use the example of, how do we make sure that we have enough driver or enough routes for, like, let's say we're a school bus company, given the driver shortage. And then the next person says, well, how do we maintain the routes given the age of the vehicles? And so what you do is you look for commonalities where we all have the same major strategic issue, but maybe we all have different constraints. And so you just keep listing all the constraints next to each other. And then the idea is that you want to kind of group them all together so that all the things that are kind of similar, that's one big strategic issue, one big rock that needs to be moved. And then you just go around the room and until all the ideas are out on the table and you're writing them down on a piece of paper. We like to use poster board or whiteboards. And then what you do after you've gone through and kind of gotten it all on the board, everybody's had a chance to weigh in and say, yep, these are, my top 3 are represented up here somewhere. You give everybody a marker and you have them go vote. Like, all right, if there's 8, then I'll give everybody about 2 votes. Usually I'm doing about a third. And what you're trying to do is prioritize. We ended up, I think there were 6 of us at the meeting, and we ended up with 8 strategic issues.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot.
It wasn't a lot this time.
People.
I've had it before where we've had 6 people and we've had 20 strategic issues. And sometimes that means we just didn't do a good job combining similar themes. Other times it was just everybody was kind of all over the board.
Well, and this time it seems like everyone recognized the same issues that we had, which is why there were so few.
We have really like a highly aligned team, which helps. So what you do is you go up and you kind of vote. So in that case, if we had 15, I'd give everybody 3 choices. And you just go put your little dot, give everybody a different color, and they go put their little dot next to the one they think is the most important. And you'll see really quickly why I like doing this is because it's very visual, and you can see really quickly what are the biggest issues that you need to focus on and where are all the dots kind of congregating. If you're the leader, this is one of those times you have to go last. You don't get to weigh in because your weight will sway the vote. And so you do need to kind of wait, let everybody else vote how they want to, and then you go up and weigh in on the ones you want to.
In most cases, as a leader, I'd like to go last for that very reason.
Right. Because you just know. And it's unintentional, and some people will say, oh, no, that doesn't affect me at all, but it does. Especially if you see the leader voting on one thing and you're like, oh, no, he's definitely right. Like, I'm going to vote for that now, whereas my first reaction was to vote for this other thing. So you kind of go through and do that. And then from there, you talk through, all right, well, it looks like we've got 3, maybe 4 top priorities. What do we think is the most important one? And it actually will help you sort. Because if you've got, let's say there's 6 of us, so there's 6 votes on one issue, but only 3 or 4 on the other 2, you already identified your top issue that you need to focus on.
Yeah. So from your perspective, after doing this for a while, how many things do you single out to concentrate on for the upcoming year, quarter, trimester?
This is one of those cases where less is more. The more focused you can get, the better you'll be. We've gone through, and I've had some people say you can only pick one. Patrick Lencioni recommends only picking one. Focus on what's most important right now, which is one over the next 3 to 4 months. I've had others, if you read John Doerr talking about OKRs and what Google sets, how Google does OKRs, Spotify, a lot of those tech companies, they'll do 3 to 5. My preference, and I think every organization has to figure this out for themselves, is I think we at our company can usually focus on 2. Every time I've seen us try to add a 3rd or a 4th, those 3rd and 4th usually end up not being as big of a priority, and so they get neglected.
Yep.
Or the worst thing that happens, and this happens actually more often than not, is that the third and fourth thing are simpler and easier, and they rob attention. They cannibalize the attention that the biggest priority needs. And it just happens because they're simpler, easier, more understandable, whereas the big one just feels like it's too big. And so you shy away from it because it makes you uncomfortable.
Well, most people gravitate towards the easy.
Right. You don't want to fail.
Yep.
And so that's something else I've seen is that if you can really nail it down, and if you have a really big issue, even go so far as to just make it that one, have one goal, one priority, and this is where we're going. And then if it's, you have a second issue or a third issue, sometimes you need to fill in a little bit and you can do that. But the whole idea is less is more. The more focused you can get, the more intentional you can get, the more intensity you can put behind a goal. One of the examples I love giving when I talk about this is imagine a light bulb, right? And let's talk incandescent light bulbs because LEDs are a different world. But an incandescent light bulb, 50, 60 watt light bulb, and you turn it on and it generates a lot of heat, but it also it can light up a small room. But you take that small, that's 50 or 60 watts, right? And then you concentrate it and you look at something like a laser, and a laser runs on less than a watt. Like they're really, really low powered lasers, but they're so focused that they can burn a hole through a wall. You can't do that with a 60 watt bulb. So even though it's got 60 times the amount of power, it's unfocused and it just spreads light around the entire room. But you focus that into the pinpoint accuracy of a laser, and now you can etch a hole in the wall. That's what focus does for you, as it really creates something that can really hone in. Now, it's not going to light up a room, but it's going to really make a dent in whatever it's doing.
Huh. I learned something just now.
There you go, right? Is that lasers don't require a lot of power.
Yeah.
So
interesting. Well, and like when you talk about that focus and goal setting, it needs to be something quantifiable. So the goal can't be, we're going to grow this year.
Right.
Okay. We're going to grow 20% this year.
Yep.
You have to make it something that's measurable. If it's not measurable, you're never gonna reach for the stars.
Yep. I like using the SMART framework. It's got to be specific. You've got to be able to know and look at it and say, okay, I know what this is. I understand what this means. It can't be something vague or ambiguous. You need to make it measurable. So it's got to have a definitive, we can track this, measure it, make sure it's getting done. I like to switch out. A lot of people put A as attainable. Attainable is okay if you just want to be okay, right? If mediocrity is your thing, then attainable is your A. I like to make it ambitious. Give me something that I can stretch for. Give me something that's going to push me beyond what I'm at. Google talks about 10xing. What do I need to do to have 10x whatever this is today? If I'm doing 10x revenue, how do I 10x the number of subscribers to my YouTube channel? How do we 10x, right? And you're multiplying it by 10. How would you run, if you looked at your fleet today, how would you run a fleet 10 times the size that you are today? How would you, improve? Maybe you're only getting a few customer satisfaction surveys and they're 2s and 3s. How would you 10x that and get nothing but 5s? Right. So you look for that, like what's the big 10x growth that you could achieve? And that's ambitious. The goal there is that if you aim for the stars and hit the moon, like at least you'll still be way further than if you had just gone.
You're on the friggin' moon, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But that's the idea, is that you want to aim high so that even if you miss a little, you're still way further along than if you'd aim low and hit it. So I like to switch out the A. Instead of attainable, I make it ambitious. I like relevant for R, is that it's something that ties back. It's important. It's relevant. Some people also say that it's responsible. It's something you can be responsible for, that you have ownership over and you can actually influence, which I think is also very smart. And then the last one is probably the most important, which is time bound. You have to set a deadline. So when you said we want to grow revenue by 20% this year, check. Whenever I talk about relevancy, I always like to say why. Why is this important? Why is it important? What's the purpose behind something? And that kind of goes back to Simon Sinek talking about start with why, just because it helps illustrate the purpose. Like, what is the reason that we need to grow revenue by 20%? What is that going to do for us? And that's really where being intentional and casting the vision turns into, like, you're painting a picture, not just for you or your executive team, but everybody that's underneath you. And you paint that picture and you set the vision about what this looks like when we hit this goal and what it means for them personally. And now all of a sudden you can really tap into some true motivation not just, extrinsic motivation where we talk about money and compensation, but really I'm going to go out and make a difference. And I want to be a part of that world, that picture that you're painting for me. You're setting a direction for the train, and you're getting everybody on board and saying, all right, you guys, this is where the train's going. You can either get on board or we're going to leave you here at the station, but you're giving them something they can rally towards or rally away from. But at least you're setting something. You're putting a line in the sand. So.
Yeah, and it is important that everybody can be involved, which is another part of this. Every facet of the organization should have some kind of motivation or part to play on these OKRs or these goals.
And I think one of the things when you do that for them, when they have that part in it, one of the things we like to do is create themes. And you create a theme about, hey, how do we want to paint this in a picture that we could just rattle it off on the top of our tongue? And something memorable, something that, you don't need to know the specifics. Well, if we're going to grow revenue by 20%, what's these, is it 20%? Is it 10? What's the number? And so, but you want to have something that it speaks to people. It's an emotional word. Right now we're working on staffing up on our team. And so one of the things that we came up with for our next trimester, the next 4 months, is Avengers Assemble. And we just know that when we're talking about, well, that's part of the Avengers Assemble initiative, that for us, that means we're staffing up. It's onboarding, it's hiring, it's job ads. We know what that means and what's involved in that. But it helps us rally around it like we can go walk around the room and shout out Avengers Assemble and see what happens.
Well, and it's fun because you can do little things with it, different Marvel characters or whatever else.
Right.
Hell, we just hired the Scarlet Witch, so.
That's right. Our new EAA.
Yeah, she's like the most powerful being in the universe, which is fantastic.
And that's what we need.
That is what we need.
So then the last thing is, as you go through and you come up with your goals and your priorities, is repeat yourself, communicate it to the rest of the team, remind them constantly about what you're working on, what's most important, because I will tell you what is inertia and that bureaucratic status quo are always trying to seep back into the organization. And the fires that come up will cause so many distractions that will pull them away from the priorities. There's a reason why these are priorities. It's because they're not getting enough time compared to the day-to-day operations, the business as usual. And so you have to remind them. You have to constantly repeat yourself. You have to put up things on the wall. You have to set goals and maybe do a party at the end of your trimester or your quarter. But you have to do something that helps reinforce, repeat, and remind everybody about what's most important.
Hey, there's not a single person in business who hasn't had a goal or some type of, this is what we're going to do, that once you've put it out there, after a couple weeks, it's just on the wayside. And you don't think about it again until the end of the quarter. And you're like, hey, so where are we at on X?
And I think that's what I love about, this theme, right? We're doing this because New Year's was last week and everybody likes to set New Year's resolutions. But if I were to ask you December 31st, what your resolutions were from 2020, how many of us would say, oh yeah, I got all of those? How many of us didn't even write them down and couldn't tell you what our resolutions were?
Most. Well, I think people know. It's just they don't want to admit it because they totally fell off the wagon.
And it probably only took until maybe February or March for them to totally fall off the wagon. Because why? Life happens,
My least favorite time of the year is January at the gym.
Yep.
Because every swinging Tom, Dick, and Harry's in there working out because it's their New Year's resolution. By the second week in February, it's back to normal.
And that's all it takes.
Yep.
Who was it? Mike Tyson says everybody's got a plan until somebody punches you in the mouth.
Yeah.
That's life.
It is.
Life is just right there waiting to punch you in the mouth. And if you don't have a plan on how you're going to keep focused and get back on track, this is what's going to happen. And so you have to figure out what your systems are, what your processes are, how you're going to remind people, how you're going to stay on track of things like that. We use a tool called 15-5, which is awesome. And it helps every week. There's a cadence. And every week you've got to remind yourself, oh yeah, that's right. I was supposed to work on that this week. And it helps you prioritize your time and prioritize your week. And that's the kind of thing that you have to do to help reinforce the vision and reinforce your resolutions.
Yeah. The other thing, and not to, praise 15-5, but what I like about it is you also have to update the status of those goals.
There are a lot of tools that do this.
Yeah, but
15-5 does it really well.
Yeah, then every week you're updating your goals and you know where you're at.
Yeah.
It's not something that, hey, 3 weeks down the road, I'm going to go in and figure out where I'm at, because on a weekly basis.
This is where we are. This is how we did. Did we do well? Did we do not? What I love is there's no judgment in the process.
Yes.
It's just, we didn't do it. Okay, what needs to change? And that's just the constant thing, is what needs to change. How do we change? Because if we keep doing what we've always done, we're always going to get the results we've always gotten. And that's the kick of it, is if we want to do things different, if we want to get different results, we have to do things differently. Ramsey calls it, if you want to live like no one else, then you have to live like no one else. It's the same thing in business. If you want to operate and you want to achieve like no one else achieves, then you have to do things that nobody else does. And this is the kind of thing that you have to start including in your organization. You can't just do a budget process at the end of the year and think that you've set the vision. You have to go above and beyond. You have to do, lessons learned, accomplishments, SWOT plus, set your goals, do your strategic thinking. Like, there's a reason why we go through these exercises every quarter and every year, is to help remind us what's most important. Let's get focused. Let's be intentional.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you do a half-assed process, you're going to get half-assed results
all the time. Well, that's going to wrap it up for us today. As always, thank you for listening. We have the Fleet Success coming up.
Summit
this year, April 20th, 21st. It's going to be the week after NAFA, in case you were keeping track of that, if you're going to NAFA. It's going to be a full week after, so at least you do have that. There's a little bit of time in between. But out here in Mesa, fleetsuccesssummit.com. And big announcement, early bird pricing has been extended through the end of this month.
What?
Through the end of January. We have some awesome speakers. So I already know Kristen Hadid, author of Permission to Screw Up. She's speaking. She's going to be amazing.
She wrote that book for me.
She did. Me too.
Yeah.
It's a terrific book if you get to listen to that. But she's going to be speaking to us. We've got several industry experts. I'm pretty sure my boy Facundo is going to be there. Mike Braband, we've had on the podcast before. We've got a lot of people coming. And so we're going to have some cool speaker announcements coming out. Look for the website, fleetsuccesssummit.com. We'll have all the speaker bios up there. April 20th, 21st. Go get registered before the early bird pricing ends on January 31st. And as always, tell all your friends, tell your coworkers, tag us on social media at Fleet Success, and we will see you next time.
Happy New Year.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Fleet Success Show. If you liked our show, we'd appreciate your 5-star review. Be sure to subscribe anywhere you listen to podcasts and come hang out with us anywhere on social media at Fleet Success. See you next time.